Stage 3. Now you join me today, I am in the HE room and we are going to look at the recipe that's on for week 2, and it's looking at a very versatile vegetable soup. Now the skills that you're going to be looking at are the skills that we would be doing in our normal lessons anyway. So we're going to look at peeling, chopping, measuring out of ingredients, and hopefully most of what you'll have at home you'll be able to make something like this from. Now the vegetables that I'm using, you haven't got to use exactly the same ones. You can use really anything that you've got as long as you've got some potatoes. Okay, so we'll move on to looking at the ingredients. So the ingredients that you're going to need. You're going to need some potatoes. Now for this ingredient, oh I dropped one then, good catch. You're going to need 300 grams. So you will need also to use a set of scales to weigh that out. So whatever you've got in the weight of potatoes, basically you use any of the vegetables. Now the only other vegetable that is quite important to use really is an onion. And I looked in my refrigerator today and I found some cauliflower, a carrot and that onion. Now that's nearly all the ingredients you need. The only other thing you need is some vegetable stock. Now you can use any vegetable stock you like. I'm going to use just one, I think it's Asda's Own, okay? And you're going to put that into some hot water. Now, in terms of seasoning, we are going to use some pepper. And when we serve the dish, we are going to use a little bit of cream. You haven't got to put the cream in. So if you've got any dairy intolerance, just cut the cream out. And the only other thing we need for the ingredients is some oil. Now you can use olive oil or vegetable oil. In terms of equipment, I'm going to move on to what equipment you will need now. Hopefully everyone will have all this equipment at home. It's not a lot of equipment. So, a chopping board. Because I'm going to be using fruit or vegetables, I'm using a red one. Because you're at home, you haven't got to use a certain colour. You'll need a sharp knife. Obviously, when we're using knives, make sure that hopefully an adult can be around to help you with that. You will need a saucepan and some sort of wooden spoon or spatula to stir things when we start putting them in the pan. You will need a peeler, and if you don't like holding your potato with your fingers, something like a vegetable holder so you're keeping your fingers away from the blade. And the only other thing that's quite important is to have some kind of food blender available for after we've cooked everything down to just blend that down into a nice fine soup. So after we've got our ingredients and our equipment ready, we are virtually ready to start our cooking. I did forget to say though, the only other thing you will need is what's behind me there, a hob. You will only need a hob to be able to cook this vegetable soup. So I'm going to wash my hands, which is important you do as well. I'm going to make everything nice and clean and ready to cook, and I'll be back in one moment. So I've washed my hands and I've prepared some of the vegetables by giving them a little bit of a wash down so the potato skins are nice and clean now. And I've just cut the top and the bottom off the onion. Now what I'm going to do to start with, so that it's ready for when I need it, is I'm going to drop my stock cube into 700 millilitres. So with your parents, look at measuring 700 millilitres. So it's the 700 on the side of the measuring jug. Now as you can see, that's going to stay as a cube for quite some time. So I'm going to let that start to dissolve. Now dissolve's a nice word to use, and then just become part of that water to be our vegetable stock. So I've dropped that in and I'm just going to put that to one side. I might stir that occasionally while we're cooking, or while we're preparing the vegetables, sorry. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to prepare our potatoes. Now on the scales, I'll just zero the scales. Check they're in grams. my potatoes came out at being, I don't know if you can see that there, I think you can, 295 grams. Now for this recipe, we needed 300 grams, but I know that that is roughly somewhere near, okay, 300 grams. Then if I put my onion, that's 100 grams, my cauliflower, we're now up to 191, and my carrot on, if it'll stay, we're now up to 259. Now, on the recipe that I've given you, it says 200 grams. I think we'll be absolutely fine with using slightly over. As long as there's slightly more potato, then we'll be absolutely fine. So what we're going to move on to now is there's all our ingredients. We're going to start preparing. In order of preparing the vegetables, I'm going to prepare the onion last. The reason being, I don't want to cry. So, first ones I'm going to prepare are going to be the potatoes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the potato down the middle to start with. I'm going to do that with both potatoes so that we get a nice flat base so it's not rolling around. I'm then going to cut them down the middle again. Look at where my fingers are, they're out the way of the blade. If you are a little bit unsure, make sure you've got a parent or adult with you while you're doing some of this. So what I'm going to look for is to cut my potatoes into quite small cubes. So like a dice that you might play with on your games. There's a little bit of bad potato there, so I'm going to cut that out and discard it. So I'm now just going to chop down the potato to get myself some nice cubes, and I'm just going to put them in a bowl at the side for a couple of minutes. If you look, I'm keeping my fingers out the way, and if you are using a vegetable holder, exactly the same. It will enable you to keep your fingers right out the way whilst you cut your vegetable. Okay, always keeping your fingers away from the blade. So now we've got some cubed, roughly cubed potato. I'm now going to move on to our carrot. Now, the skin on vegetables is actually very good for us. So I'm not going to be too bothered about removing the skin off the carrot or off the potato. So I'm just going to do what we call top and tail the carrot and move that to the bin. I'm now going to slice the carrot, again being very careful to keep my fingers out the way of the blade edge. And that carrot, those carrot slices are going to go in with my potato pieces. Now the other vegetable that I had was cauliflower. So I'm going to take the heart out of the cauliflower and I'm just going to break that into pieces. I haven't got to really use the knife too much on cauliflower. And there's my cauliflower pieces. So the last one I'm going to prepare is my onion. So with my onion, I cut it in half to give us those flat bases again. And then I'm just going to peel out off the outer skin. To leave two nice halves of onion, and just as you go in, just clean your board down. Keep it nice and clean at all times. Then, like we did with our potato, we are going to cut our onion lengthways and then sideways. And then just finish that one off. So we've got some nice diced onion. So we've got now our onion diced. I'm actually going to put the onion in a different bowl because I like to start the onion off just slightly before the other vegetables. As I said I would, I'm just going to give our stock a little stir to make sure it's coming along nicely. If you look now, the water is starting to change colour because that's all of the different ingredients in that stock starting to be moved in to the water. And like I said earlier, the word for that would be dissolving. We are now going to move on to how we start to prepare to cook the soup. So we're now over at the hob and we're going to start to cook our soup. First thing you need to do is just become familiar with how you work your hob. This one isn't like the one I've got at home. This one is electric and it's actually quite posh because when you put your saucepan onto it, it starts to heat up. The one I've got at home is gas. So with your parent or adult, look for how you're going to start using the hob. So with this one, I turn it on and I'm going to put this one onto number 6. That should now start to heat up my pan straight away. I'm going to take a small amount of vegetable oil and just put a small amount, a couple of teaspoons, into the bottom of my pan. Now, the next thing we're going to do is just add the onions, just the onions on their own. What that will start to do is they'll start to sizzle a little bit and just soften up. So I'm going to add my onions into my pan. Then, using a spatula or a wooden spoon, I'm going to start to move the onions around until they start to soften and start to sizzle. Now, you can often listen to your cooking, so when the onions are starting to be ready for the next ingredient, they'll be sizzling, and remember what that sounds like. So, my onions have now been cooking for probably about 2 minutes. As you can hear, they're starting to sizzle. While they are doing that, make sure that you use your spatula or wooden spoon and just keep moving them to stop them from burning onto the bottom of your pan. Now, as I mentioned, these have been going for a couple of minutes now. So what I'm going to do is take all of my other vegetables. So I've got in here my potato, my carrot and my cauliflower, and I'm going to add them to the oil. Mix them round slightly. And I'm going to leave those to sizzle and seal for a couple of minutes, just until they start to just take on that little tiny bit of oil and the flavour of the onion. What I can do now is I can start to season my soup. So I'm going to add into here some pepper and some salt. Can you hear that sizzle? So, in my saucepan now, I have all of my ingredients and they're sizzling away nicely. Remember to keep moving them just to stop them from sticking to the bottom of your pan. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add the stock in to our soup. So I stir the stock to make sure it's fully dissolved, and all I'm going to do is just to add that into my saucepan. Now, as you can hear there, the sizzling stopped as we did that. Now that's absolutely fine, and that is what's going to happen to yours as well. Just give it a nice stir and put your spoon to one side. Now what will happen now is your soup will start to bubble and boil. Now we're going to leave this cooking now for about 10 to 15 minutes until all of your vegetables have gone nice and soft. To help things move along a little bit quicker and to keep some of the taste and flavour in, I'm just going to cover the soup to help it boil. Now it's very important while you do that just to keep an eye on it to make sure it doesn't bubble over onto your hob. I've actually now had to go up on my hob to number 8. So whilst our soup is boiling down, it's quite a good time to actually move on to doing some of the washing up, perhaps wiping our surfaces down and make sure everything's nice and clean. So I can wipe down my chopping board, my knives, my bowls, my measuring jug, everything that I've come into contact with. I can now use the washing up bowl and make sure everything's nice and clean, because remember, we've got 10 minutes to 15 minutes until everything's gone soft in our vegetable soup. So I've done my washing up, and it probably took me a little bit longer than 10 minutes. I think we've been boiling these down now for probably between 17 and 20 minutes. Now, a nice way to check to see whether your vegetables are soft is with an adult's help. Just get yourself a fork and press them. Either the hardest one to cut, so perhaps the carrot, or if you're using something like swede, just give some of that a little stab with the fork and you'll know whether they're done or not. Now what we're going to do, because mine is done, I've checked that, is I'm going to move my soup now carefully over to my other table where we're going to look at how we blend it down. Make sure when you do move it that you're moving safely, and make sure you've turned your hob off when you've finished. Okay? So I've brought my vegetables over to my other work surface. Now, as you can see here, I've got my blender. Now that would need an adult to help you set that up. So I've got my blender and I've got my pot that it's going to go into. We have to be very careful with this part now. So I'm going to use a ladle and I'm going to put my towel around my hand. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the top off my vegetables. You see the steam there, it's nice and hot. That might get in the way. And I'm going to slowly, without putting too much in at one go, add all of those vegetables into my blending pot. Now I'm only going to put, to start with, about half in, because when we do blend it, it's important to take into consideration the fact that it is very hot and it might expand a little. So I'm going to put the top onto my blending device, and you might not hear me for a second, but I'm just now going to blend this down until it's nice and thin. As you can see, it's changed colour, it's gone quite a creamy colour. That's probably due to the amount of potato and cauliflower in this soup. Yours might go a slightly different colour. Don't worry about that. So I'm going to carefully unscrew the top. Can you hear that? That's because it's expanded with it being hot. And remember, when you take the top off your processor, that will also be hot. That to one side. And there's my soup. So I'm now going to add my soup to my bowl. Now, I did say at the start that if you wanted to, you could, for serving, just add a little tiny bit of cream. And that is our vegetable soup. Now, before putting the cream in, it's worth mentioning that if you do get it to the soup stage, you can freeze that recipe for probably up to about a month. So if you've made it today and then you go on a walk in a couple of days, it's a nice winter warmer for you. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the recipe we've done today, and next week we're going to be looking at a nice winter fruit crumble. So the things you might need for next week will be some whatever fruit you want to use, really. I might be using some frozen berries plus a couple of apples. And then if you've got any left over, a little shortcut we might do is if you've got a pack of shortbread biscuits and perhaps some nuts, but otherwise it will be some sugar, some flour and some butter. And then if you want to be a bit naughty, then you might be able to have yourself some custard or ice cream on it. Well, That's today's recipe done, and I'll speak to you next week. Happy cooking, everybody.